What's up everyone? Today I wanted to talk about my favorite nonfiction books, but nonfiction books that actually read like fiction. If you're scared of nonfiction books, do not click off of this video because I promise you these recommendations that I have are not going to be boring to read or to listen to. I am not a lover of dense textbook type of nonfiction books, and so the nonfiction books that I have on this list read very similarly to fiction. They're engaging, they're shocking, they're dark, they're exciting to read. They're almost similar, I feel like, to when I read a thriller, like how I feel where I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to like turn the page, like this is so great right now. A lot of these have that feeling towards them. Let me just put a disclaimer that a lot of these nonfiction books will probably have lots of trigger warnings. I do not have the full list of trigger warnings, and I will be talking about a lot of dark topics. So if those types of books aren't for you, then maybe you want to not watch this video because my channel is me reading a lot of dark and crazy things. I've actually only been getting into nonfiction and memoirs and stuff in the last, I would say, 2 years or less. But I think one of the big keys is to find nonfiction books about topics that you want to learn more about, that you're interested in. And we're not talking about self-help books or anything like that. We're talking about, like, for instance, I love polygamy and cults. And so I have been loving reading nonfiction books about actual people that grew up in cults or had this like cult lifestyle. Those are the kinds of books that interest me. So we're gonna talk about my 5-star favorite nonfiction recommendations. I have a bunch on that list. And then I think I'm going to do some 4 stars that I really enjoyed that I think you guys would enjoy picking up as well. So we'll have what's called, I guess, honorable mentions. So let's go ahead and get started. First off on this list, we're gonna start with Spilled Milk. This book is a nonfiction book, even though there has been talk about people saying that it's not true or not, but the actual author, I have watched her on TikTok and she changed like some names and places and stuff just because if she uses those real terms, I guess it hits too close to home. But this book is about her life growing up and the child abuse, the rape, and lots of different things that she had to go through within her childhood. I actually read this book in almost a day. I think I only had a little bit left to finish the next day. I don't believe that there's an audio for it. I did read the physical copy, but I was just so incredibly shocked at what children have to go through at times when they're going through family sexual assault and just abuse in general. This was very, very thrilling. I found myself like just constantly wanting to read through it. So it definitely does not feel like textbook nonfiction. It feels very much like a story. And there's many times with these books that I'm reading that I have to remind myself, like, this is a true story. Like, this is not just something that someone made up. Next up, we have the book called Hope. This is a true story about these 3 girls who were kidnapped as young teenagers. I believe they were like 13 and 14 years old, and they were actually held captive in this guy's basement for, I think, at least 10 years. It might have even been more than that. This does not read like textbook nonfiction. It doesn't read like research or anything like that. It's these girls' actual accounts of what it was like to be kidnapped and what it was like to live in this kidnapper's house for a really long time. And one of them even had gotten pregnant and birthed the child of this kidnapper. And so this book really pulls on your heartstrings, not only because you're thinking about, gosh, like what would that feel like? Where one day you are just, you know, going about your daily life and you're not even thinking that this could happen to you. And the next day you are kidnapped and just having horrible things done to you. But not only that, then having a child where you start kind of developing feelings, almost like a Stockholm syndrome, just because of the fact that your child's father is this kidnapper. Like, I don't know, it was just very, very emotional. And the ending part of, you know, kind of figuring out like what happened and, you know, when they got rescued and stuff like that, I remember my heart was beating a lot. I did listen to this on audio and I thought it was amazing, but if you have the physical book, there are pictures in the book. I actually had both audio and physical, and I really like the nonfiction books in physical format because of the extra added pictures that they usually have in them. So I would recommend either listening and reading at the same time, or you can listen to it and you can have the physical book just to look at the pictures, but they were both really, really great in whatever format. All right, one of my favorite books of like all time, and it's one of the first like nonfiction books I read, was The Sound of Gravel. Now this one is about polygamy. I think it was the very first polygamy book that I read that was a true story, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. A lot of these nonfiction books, like, you go through so many emotions reading them because you are reading about people's real life stories, and you know, bad things happen to people in real life. And so I definitely cried through this one. I actually have an old reading vlog because I read this one a few years ago.
Okay, so literally just finished reading The Sound of Gravel. And this is like one of the saddest books I have ever read in my life. Like, I was going to continue this vlog and read one more book for this vlog, but like, I don't think I can mentally and emotionally like handle it.
And so I'll put it up here for you guys because I have actual footage of me like crying my eyes out while reading this book because of how sad it was. This is about a polygamy cult. There are multiple families in this cult, multiple children, and they live in poverty. I mean, they don't even have running water. A lot of times they're starving, they're freezing cold. I mean, the way that they're living is just absolutely terrible. But there's definitely other dark topics, sexual abuse and rape and stuff like that. I don't think I listened to the audio for this one. I think I just might have read the physical copy, but I remember again, there were pictures in the physical copy, and that is one of the reasons why like it brought me to tears, because I saw like pictures of these people, and you know, when you see actual real life pictures and you're listening to the story and it all comes together in your head, like it's very sad. But I really, really enjoyed this book, and it definitely did not read like nonfiction. It read like a fiction story, but obviously it's true. The next book I want to talk about is pretty popular actually. A lot of you might have already read it already. It's Educated, and this one has kind of a same feel as The Sound of Gravel, kind of a different way, I guess. Educated is about Tara, who grew up where her family did not believe in sending their kids to school, and they kind of took like not even a homeschooling approach, but almost like a unhomeschooling approach. Her dad thought the government was out to get them. They did not believe in modern medicine. So her mom, I think, was a midwife, and if anything bad happened, like if someone lost a leg, like they still were not allowed to go to the doctor. They had to just believe in God and that he would heal and bring happiness. So there's definitely like those triggers in there, but what's really great is the fact that she was able to educate herself and end up going to college and stuff, but her story is just very interesting to read about because of kind of having that off the grid approach. I thought that was very interesting. It reminded me a little bit of like how I was homeschooled. I mean, obviously not to even that extreme, but I think that's why I enjoyed it, is because there were definitely those shock factors, but also some of it was like, oh yeah, I was kind of raised like that too, like some of that familiarity. But I really enjoyed this one. I believe I did read the physical and do the audio at the same time, and both of those were really great. Okay, next up, we're gonna talk about Member of the Family. This is a memoir by one of the girls who was part of Charles Manson's cult. So this is the first time I had read anything about Charles Manson, and I know a lot of people really like the book Helter Skelter, but I tried to read Helter Skelter, and oh my gosh, that was such a boring textbook. I did not finish it because I absolutely hated it. This is a much better option if you wanted to learn more about Charles Manson, or if you wanted to hear Diane's story of what it was like, because I think she was 14 when she met Charles Manson. It also had really great like 60s and 70s vibes in it. And so when I was reading it, I really felt like I was there, like in that time period. I was listening to like 60s and 70s music. I think I might have a reading vlog for it. So if I do, I'll put it up here for you guys. Member of the Family, my story of Charles Manson, life inside his cult, and the darkness that ended the 60s. At age 14, I became one of Charles Manson's girls. At 17, I helped put him in prison. This is my story. But I really, really loved this book just because of how easy it was to read and to listen to. And again, there's pictures in it. I really liked hearing Diane's story of like, she even kind of explains how you don't set out to like become part of a cult. She talks about how the cult just kind of like comes up on you. Like, you know, you're not saying, oh yeah, I want to be part of this cult. It's just all of a sudden you're in a cult. And so that was very interesting because I always think about that. Like, you know, why would anyone want to join a cult? So this is my choice of pick. If you wanted to learn more about Charles Manson, don't read Helter Skelter, read this one because it feels like fiction. Okay, next up, we're gonna talk about The Family Next Door. This is about these like, is it 13? I think it's 13 siblings that were rescued because they were absolutely abused their entire life. I come from a big family. I have 10 siblings. And so reading something like this was so shocking to me because we were definitely not neglected. Like with having a large family, there was not neglect like that. And I just could not believe like these parents would chain up their kids. They would put their kids into cages and leave them there for days. They would not let them take baths. Like these kids, when they were rescued, were so like malnourished that a lot of them didn't even grow to their potential, or they had like muscle deformities and stuff like that because they just didn't get the correct nutrients. They didn't get to see the sunlight. They had to stay up during the night and then sleep during the day. It is a shocking story. Now, I will say that this book written by John Glatt is definitely a little bit more on the like research side and kind of pulls in like articles and interviews and stuff like that. So of this entire list that I'm talking about of books that don't feel like nonfiction, I think that this one is probably the one that's least likely to be read as if it was a fiction book, but it definitely was not too dense. I listened to it and I read the physical copy. There are pictures in the physical copy. And so I still really, really enjoyed it. I still thought it was absolutely amazing, but it definitely was a little bit harder to read, not as easy listening as some of these other books that I talked about. Next up, we're gonna talk about If You Tell. This, I remember reading this and I read it in an entire day. I actually listened to it on audio. It was absolutely great. I was driving and listening to it and I had to actually look up because I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I got this wrong. Maybe this is actually a fiction book. Like there's no way that this is true. Looked it up. It's totally a nonfiction book. This is about this mom that is crazy, like absolutely crazy. Murders people, abuses her kids, gets away with stuff. Like if you want to read a shocking book, this one is shocking. It is also very entertaining, very fast paced. I mean, there's nothing like better for me to say about it. This is like one of my favorite books of all time. I just absolutely was just so entertained, but in like not a good way, I guess. Like, I mean, it's bad that kind of stuff is entertaining to me. I just can't believe that there are people out there that are like this mom. It just blows my mind. So definitely read this one. It is absolutely phenomenal. Okay, we're gonna talk about two more on my 5-star list, but these ones are kind of, if you wanna say lighthearted, like they're not about sexual abuse or polygamy cults. They're more memoirs, but I did have a really good experience reading and listening to them because they were just so entertaining. So first up, we have Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. I would say if you don't like any form of self-help and you don't like Matthew McConaughey, then you can skip this one. I don't think that you would think it's that great or amazing, but I listened to the audiobook and I just had a great time. I didn't think I was gonna like this book as much as I did, but Matthew McConaughey is such a good storyteller, and just him telling stories of his life, growing up, becoming an actor, just things like that it was so entertaining because he's just that good at storytelling. I was laughing with him. It was just a phenomenal audiobook. And also, I mean, his accent comes through because he's the one that's narrating it. So again, if you're a Matthew McConaughey fan, I think that you would like this one. It does have some self-help type of vibes to it because he's kind of like giving advice throughout the book. So I know some people that like absolutely despise self-help didn't like it that much, but I had a really great time and it's a really easy listen. So if you're like cleaning the house or something, this is a good one to listen to. Okay, the other one I want to talk about is Me by Elton John. Again, if you're not like a fan of Elton John, I don't really feel like you need to read memoirs of certain people that you really don't care about, but I really love Elton John's music, and after reading this memoir, I became an even bigger fan just because of the fact that I knew more about him. I knew about his struggles, I knew about his drug addiction, I knew about his rehab, and it's just so cool to kind of see famous people, like what they dealt with before they became famous, what they dealt with while they were famous, and I really like this one a lot. This one, I believe that I mostly listen to the audiobook. It is narrated by the actor that plays Elton John in Rocket Man, so I kind of like that that was like a full circle type of thing, but I had a really good time with this one. Again, it's more of that like lighthearted, like story time vibe, so you could easily listen to this while you're like cleaning or like taking a walk. You don't have to like focus too much into it, but if you like Elton John, it's a must. Okay, the next books I'm gonna talk about, these are like honorable mentions, so they got like 4 stars from me, but I think that they're good enough that some of you might want to pick them up, especially if you've already read some of these favorites that I had. So the first 2 I want to talk about, one is Escape and one is Breaking Free. So if you have already read like The Sound of Gravel that I talked about earlier and you wanted more of that like polygamy cult feel, both of these talk about Warren Jeffs, who is like the main polygamy cult leader that's currently in jail, I believe still. So these both have like that same vibe of it's one of his wives growing up kind of in this polygamy cult, what they deal with, how they grow up with it, when they get married really young, how they have kids, all of that kind of stuff. So both of these were really good, but because I have read so many polygamy cult books, they just weren't 5 stars to me because I kind of knew a lot of the information already. But for those of you that maybe are just dabbling into this and you wanted to learn more about polygamy cults and Warren Jeffs, both of these are fantastic, and I think I listened to both of them on audio, and I had the physical book. They do have pictures in them. The next book is actually an Amish nonfiction book that I read called Tears of the Silenced, and I actually grew up in Pennsylvania, and it was right around Amish Mennonite, and I learned a lot from this book because of the fact I didn't exactly think about the fact that like Amish are kind of a cult and they do a lot of shady things. And so if you wanted to learn more about that, or if you like kind of cults in general or like secret society, shadiness, that kind of thing, then you might want to check this one out. It didn't get a full 5 stars for me because there were a few parts that I felt were slightly boring. I did listen to this one all on audio, and there were definitely shocking parts, and there were definitely parts where I could have went without that, whatever part of that story it was, but I did learn a lot, and don't become part of the Amish, okay? Okay, last but not least, I wanted to talk about A Mother's Reckoning. This book is actually written by one of the moms of the Columbine shootings. So I have only just recently started getting into like knowing about the Columbine shooting or reading about school shootings in general. And so this one was very fascinating to me because of the fact that you got to read from the mom's perspective. Again, I only gave it 4 stars instead of 5, just because it's going to read a little bit slower than some of these other books I talked about. There are a few boring parts in there, but the good parts are really good. And you know, it really opens your eyes as to what it would feel like if your own child had done something like this, how her life like was affected by all of that. and just, I don't know, it was kind of like a heavy topic to read about, obviously, and all of these pretty much are, but it was definitely worth reading if you are interested in learning more of that topic. Now, with any of these books, if you're not really interested in the topic, I definitely wouldn't try them out because you're probably just going to think that they're boring in general because you're not fascinated by the subject. But I was fascinated by all of the subjects that I talked about in all of these books, so these are some of my favorites. All right, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have any nonfiction recs for me where you feel like they read like fiction, that they were a really good, interesting story, very entertaining, thrilling, whatever, definitely let me know down below so that way I can add more to my list. I do have more on my shelf that I want to get to, and so I would love to make a part 2 of this once I actually have read more of those. I'm just like a really big fan of nonfiction that isn't boring and textbooky. Like, nonfiction that reads like fiction is just so good because it's a true story. It doesn't get more shocking than that. All right, I will see you guys very soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.
How come the stars come to shine when it's dark from so far away?